welcome everyone to this forum this morning. I'm sure we'll all remember the beginning of 2020 when news stories started emerging of a virus being identified in a far off place called Wuhan. Then it was in other countries in the Far East, then it was in ski resorts in the Alps, then it was in our hospitals. First UK case recorded, I think, end of January last year. And actually on the 3rd of March 2020, my colleague Martin Taylor, who we'll be hearing from later, and I were actually at lunch in London with Mark Prothero, who many of you will know. We proudly told him how well prepared we were to deliver our training virtually if it became necessary. He countered by saying that he didn't think the June exams would be able to run anywhere. And actually that for me was the moment the full enormity of what was coming truly hit home. Actually, that was the last time I was in London. By the 16th of March, Boris Johnson told us now is the time for everyone to stop non-essential contact and travel. On the 26th of March, lockdown measures became law. I think initially for 12 weeks, if you remember, somewhat optimistically. Diaries cleared, offices emptied, holidays postponed, and postponed and postponed. You know, we certainly all learned a lot in the last 15 months. We've learned how quickly whole businesses, whole industries could switch to working at home. We've learned how much more important our people are than our premises or our social media campaigns, and how much we need to focus on their mental health and well-being. We've learned just how important our local pubs, local restaurants, grocers, hairdressers are to us. We've learned how far it is from Durham to Barnard Castle. That's one for the chat box if anyone remembers. We've learned that the thing we miss most is each other. Isolation certainly increases thoughts of connectedness. Now, I remember when remote meant the Galapagos Islands, not my own kitchen. Our vocabulary has changed. New words and old world words taking on new meaning. Unprecedented, furlough, Zoom. Pivot, resilience, community, collaborate, together. And just like this event this morning, the phrase I've heard most in the last 15 or 16 months is, we'll get through this together. Now, it's clear that throughout the pandemic, accountants have been busy, busier than ever before. Accountants were busy helping clients take advantage of the various government support measures, CBILS, bounce back loans, VAT deferrals, CJRS, the furlough scheme, arguably the most impactful of them all, announced by Rishi Sunak on the 20th of March, 6 days before that first lockdown, unbelievably quickly for such an enormous comprehensive scheme. Accountants were busy helping clients constantly reforecasting cash flow needs, managing liquidity, preserving their businesses. Accountants were busy adjusting to new ways of recruiting, onboarding, and managing their own teams. And after this most grueling year, financially, physically, mentally, on the 8th of December last year, you might remember Maggie Keenan became the first person in the UK to be vaccinated outside a clinical trial, and the fight back started. I think you'd all agree the vaccine rollout has been an unbelievable success, something I think this country can look at with huge pride. You know, we're now seeing, following from the largest fall in GDP in 300 years in 2020, you know, a bounce back, what the Bank of England are forecasting will be the largest rise in 70 years, an economic bungee jump, what the Bank of England are describing as a coiled spring. And as busy as accountants were in the worst of the crisis, you can bet they'll be just as busy in this recovery. You know, we at First Intuition are already seeing recruitment levels for entry-level positions on a scale never seen before, and newly qualified, experienced accountants are like gold dust. I'm sure a lot of you will be suffering those issues. Now, from the very start, back in March last year, First Intuition ran regular employer webinars, trying to keep the industry up to date with changes to exams, changes to delivery methods, changes to apprenticeship rules, changes to the government support measures. At first, we were running webinars twice a week. There was so much going on. You know, and we've continued since, covering hot topics from remote recruitment and onboarding to EDI, data analytics. And through it all, we've been blessed with the unwavering support and input of the 4 awarding bodies that we work with: AAT, ACCA, CIMA and ICAEW, what became known as our United Nations of accountancy bodies. I can't thank them enough for their attendance, their contribution, their tireless efforts to keep employers and students informed, often in real time. And I thought it'd be really interesting to bring them together again this morning to actually look at the impact the pandemic has had on the accountancy and finance sector and the changes they think are around the corner. So I'm really delighted to have a fantastic lineup of speakers this morning. We're going to hear from the 4 awarding bodies to start with. We're then going to hear from some kind of expert industry observers. And as I've said, please feel free, across the audience, do chip in your own contributions and comments, pop questions in if you've got any. Love to see the chat box getting really busy. And to start with, I'm just wondering, do we have Helen Partridge actually with us at this stage? I don't think we do. We are hoping to be joined by Helen, who's Director of Accountancy Education at IFAC. She's going to be hopefully dialing in live from New York. And I believe it is currently 10 to 4 in the morning. So hopefully she will join us to give some contribution. But I would like to kick off by going to our United Nations of awarding bodies to actually hear from the 4 awarding bodies that we certainly work with and who've really helped out over the last year or so with the sort of pandemic webinars that we've been doing. And I want to sort of start by looking back at what has happened over this last year. Then we'll think more about the current position, looking at the future. So I'm going to pose a kind of fairly vague question to our panel. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and their roles as they start their answers. But initially, my kind of opening question is, how do they think the pandemic has affected the accountancy industry in general? And what do they think were the key responses to COVID that they made as an awarding body? And actually, with the benefit of hindsight, would they have done anything differently? So fairly broad, open question. And I'm wondering whether I might call on Andrew Williamson to start with the AAT. I mean, certainly we've seen huge growth in the use of AAT, along with school leaver programs and the sort of level 2 to 4 apprenticeship programs. So I know an awful lot of employers on the call will be very familiar with the AAT. So Andrew, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off.
Thanks, Gareth. Good morning, everybody. I suppose just to start by echoing your preamble, Gareth. When all this landed on us in March last year, we as AAT, the directors, we had an emergency meeting. We decided we needed one of those. It wasn't the last. We've had plenty since, and we said, well, what are we going to do? So this was about a fortnight, 10 days before the official lockdown. So we came up with a plan. Let's send everybody home tomorrow and see whether the technology works. And if the technology works, let's tell them not to come back in. So that's kind of what we did. And that's testament to our staff and also our technology that it did work. But my word, I can remember one of my directorate colleagues saying she had tickets for the Wimbledon semi-finals and she was rather hoping it wouldn't be off. Oh my word, where are we now? So I'm going to sort of limit my my contribution in this first question, Gareth, because as you say, it's a fairly open one, to 2 or 3 areas. And I'm going to start with students. I beg your pardon, let me just rewind my role. I'm Andrew Williamson. I'm the Director of Marketing and Commercial. So whatever it is, it's bound to be my fault. So I'm going to start with students. We've got about 75,000 students at any one time at AAT, and a lot happened in the student world. But the output of that was for a long period of time, we didn't have students completing their qualifications. They couldn't sit the assessments, or their college was closed, and that was a huge issue, and it's really knocked on to, again, something Gareth started within his preamble, the availability of qualified accountants. Okay, qualified at an entry level, but it's dried up. It's coming back now because our training providers are pushing through as fast as they can to get students to complete. But the pressure on the student and the employer, particularly if we go into apprenticeships, where we had a whole cohort of students who were just becalmed. They couldn't really do very much. So we worked very closely with our training providers, not so much with the private guys like First Intuition, but if I take us into FE, which is a purely face-to-face delivery, my word, have they struggled. And we work very closely with them to allow them to do more of a blended delivery. So that's something which has really knocked on, really impacted now. Do I think it'll stay? Yes, I do. I think the delivery, the delivery vehicle will become much more of a blend between face-to-face and online digital. So if I just park students for a while and park training providers for a while, the industry itself, our members, we have about 50,000 members. Of those, probably about 5,000 are licensed to run their own practices. We see, I suppose, a split within those practices. I always say it's a third, a third, a third. A third came into this fairly digital. A third came into this not in the slightest bit digital. And a third in the middle came into this thinking, well, we probably ought to do something about digital, and they were on a journey. And we'd always said round the senior table at AAT that it's probably a 5-year delivery for that third, a third, a third to get much more into 3/4 of them, 90% of them digital. Well, instead of that happening in 5 years, it probably happened in 5 weeks. So the big change for us that we see is that our licensed practices are operating in almost a completely digital way. They have to, they don't have a choice. And that's influenced what they do, because it's no longer just about the accounts. It's no longer just about the numbers. The big piece for us, bearing in mind that most of our licensed members would support the relatively small to medium-sized business, has been around support. Gareth mentioned at the start what government measures were available and am I entitled to them? If you speak to our members were saying so much of their time was working with a small business to actually work out what they were entitled to and how on earth to claim it. And that's something that really impacted on us too, because real-time changes, well, we were pushing out information as fast as we possibly could to our membership and beyond, just saying, well, this is the current view. And I was laughing with one of our council members who runs a digital practice, who was saying, yeah, you were doing that alongside Brexit as well. But we won't talk Brexit. That's another round table. We do that one on another day. So information, provision of information, support for our members came before how do you keep me in business as a small and medium-sized organization? What am I entitled to came first. How do I get it? But then it was rapidly followed by, now help me, because I'm in trouble just like everybody else is. How on earth do I pay the bill? How do I keep this thing afloat? How do I keep going?
I think it's an interesting point you make, Andrew, there about communication and information, because I have felt more like a press officer for the last year or so than anything else, just constantly pushing out information. And also, you know, I think it's clear that this has highlighted the advantage of digital services and digital firms. And I might bring Shaun in at this point, actually, from the ICAEW, because, you know, I know the ICAEW has been doing a lot to incorporate data analytics in some of the exams and to use digital learning materials. So Shaun, can I get your view for a few minutes?
Yes, good morning everybody. Thanks Gareth. My name's Shaun Robertson, Director of Qualification and Education, ICAEW. So look after our qualification, the content, and the changes, the development of the qualification. And you're right, I think exactly what was just said there about, I should just take a step back. A lot of the rhetoric we're being told initially was how much the accountants are embracing all this new technology. It's refreshing to see the rhetoric's changed a little bit over the past few months to the technology was already there. It's a case of accountants hadn't actually just stepped up to the mark. So now we are embracing what was already there. So it's not so much a step forward 5 years, it's actually using what was there. Luckily, and it's pure luck, at ICAEW, we had already set on a path of really embracing the digital platform our exams were on. Our exams were already on computers. We got them on safely and securely. And from 2021 onwards, we were doing exams 2.0. So actually using the actual machine that's there. So creating better spreadsheets, word processing, and as I mentioned, putting data analysis software actually in the exam. So rather than the students using what I used to call as a tutor, I would do this, I could do this, but actually having to go and do it live and actually search the data, which I think goes back to one thing about the whole reaction, especially from students, but members as well, to the pandemic, is that we always talk about when you're doing exams and qualifying and becoming a professional, there's a mix between technical content and skills. And some people might pay lip service to it, but I'm very passionate about the skills are much more important, how you actually use your knowledge. And I think as soon as the 23rd of March hit last year, that's all those skills, all the resilience, working together, changing, working in different ways, that came to the fore, isn't it? That you had to change the way you worked. Going forward into the future, the actual qualification process and membership, we're there now, aren't we? We're using the technology, we've embraced it, so we've got to enhance that, and we've got to ensure the students don't learn in the dark ages with paper and a quill. They've actually got to learn using all these processes and actually using the technology, but more importantly, knowing the limits, knowing the impact on the clients and so on. It's not just press the button and it works. These students have got to understand the limitation that's coming out of that and actually be able to analyze it. So the skills really have came to the forefront of that. But yes, as a qualification, we really have embraced the technology and the qualification. The big concern is we've got to make sure the existing members, I think Francis called us, or no, Gareth called us old and Francis corrected you. So, but our experienced members here, I think we've got to look at it. Maybe we've got to go back and address some of our lack of knowledge in this area to actually ensure that we get up to speed with these existing technologies.
Yeah, and I think you make a really powerful point there, Shaun, about skills. I do think, back when I qualified as an accountant, you just need to have the technical knowledge, and if you have the odd skill, then you got promoted to partner. Whereas now, skills are so fundamental from such an early stage in young professionals' journeys, which I think has been very well catered for by the huge adoption of apprenticeships, particularly through the high level 7 qualifications, the incorporation of the skills and behaviours alongside the technical exam knowledge. And I've certainly been so impressed with the rapid development of some of these more interpersonal, I hate the word soft skills, it kind of makes them sound less important, whereas they're the crucial ones. So, the development, and it's not just the interpersonal skills, it's almost the confidence you see these young adults building at a really early stage, I think is fantastic, and has been a really great development. I'm sure, you mentioned the data analytics. I'm sure we'll return to that as part of this discussion. I know we've got Chris Argent, who I'm sure will have some views on data analytics that we're here later on. I thought I might now call on Claire Bennison. I don't know if you want to give us your views on this last 15 months, either generally in the industry or specific to how you've reacted.
Sure, thanks Gareth, and thanks for the opportunity today. So I'm Claire Bennison, I head up the ACCA activity in the UK. We're a slightly different structure at ACCA, being global as we are. I just want to take it back really. I think your introduction gave us some really good thoughts around, and probably was a fantastic summary actually of everything we've experienced over the last 15 months. There's probably 3 areas that I'd want to pick out. So the first one would be, I think, recognising your point around how tough it's been. So as an industry, as a sector, you know, we've been running at 100 miles an hour, whatever sector we work in, and our members, as the other bodies will do as well, you know, we span across public sector, private sector, industry, across sectors, but also in the practice sector, and particularly thinking about our small practices that Andrew talked about, really grappling with that government advice and having to turn that into something that clients could to work with. And we've really seen how accountants have stepped up. So I absolutely acknowledge the point that we have people on various maturity curves around digital adoption, but we've seen that accelerate, and I think we should be applauded for that as a sector. But I've also seen people really pivot on their skills, and I think the public sector, and I've seen there's a few people on this call today as well, have really seen how they can adapt those skills and really support things like PPR rollout and the vaccination programme. So I think accountants have really been able to demonstrate that that sort of core skill set that they get through the education, but also through their work experience, can really turn their hand to a number of things. I think the second thing that I would pull out would be around leadership and mental health. So I was really pleased that you pulled out mental health in your introduction, and I was really pleased to see the comments in the chat already, because one of the things, and this was global actually, which was really interesting, the level of consistency around questions around cash flow. So Andrew pulled out cash flow really early on. Everybody around the world wanted more support around cash flow as they went back to basics. The second thing that came up a few months after that was, I'm really struggling, particularly those managers early on in their career. How do I manage people remotely? How do I manage my own mental health? How do I manage my teams remotely? And that becomes even more acute when they've got responsibility for supervision of trainees. And what we really looked to do in that space was to think about how we could work with partners such as Chris and Generation CFO to really support that, but also how we could pull on our own members, because we have a number of members who are really mature in their digital adoption curve and how they managed teams already remotely. What we looked to do was trying to pull those together, so it was more of a community-based response. And then thirdly, I can't leave this conversation around how has it impacted us over the last 15 months really, without saying clearly we've seen disruption for trainees, both from a perspective of, you know, they've been incredibly busy just trying to get through the workload, but also the disruption that came from the fact that we had to make some decisions around exams, and also that's led through disruption through various sessions, whether that's pivoting to remote invigilation, which at least gave students an option to take an exam. We didn't have full success, and you know, it's always disappointing when students are impacted. And also we went back to centre-based exams where we could, where we know that not everybody, you know, I think digital inclusion is a really big issue that we need to be thinking about as we move forward. Not everybody is able to take an exam from home, and particularly thinking about those people that live in shared accommodation or perhaps are from more disadvantaged backgrounds. So, you know, we could talk about the last 15 months probably all morning, but they would be the 3 areas that I would pull out.
Great, thanks Claire. And actually I think make an interesting point about how much of this has just accelerated change that was going to happen anyway, and what has actually created genuinely new aspects, you know, particularly I guess around the remote working, which I think has, you know, I know plenty of partners who frankly wouldn't have trusted their staff at home before the pandemic, and have suddenly realised, blimey, they do still work, and actually productivity's higher than ever. So I think, you know, real mindset shift. And you know, thanks for you know, mentioning, you know, the exams, and you know, given the speed with which all the awarding bodies had to react and the scale with which they had to react, I think, you know, they've all done actually a good job really of helping students to keep progressing at a time when actually it could have been game over for 15 months in terms of exams and progression. So, you know, I would, you know, congratulate, you know, all the awarding bodies for the huge efforts I know their teams have made to allow students to sit exams. And actually this is where I might call on Steve actually, because, you know, I remember back to early last year, I mean, CIMA were kind of almost first out the gates with a remote invigilation version for their exams, which actually seems to have gone extremely well. So Steve.
Thank you, Gareth. So yeah, I'm Steve Flatman. I'm the VP of Examinations for CIMA. As Gareth said, we had a number of advantages as we went into the pandemic last year. One, we'd already computerized all of our exams back in 2015. We also had business interests in China. So early on in January, we were already seeing the pandemic affecting China. So we could see what was coming. I think we also had the advantage that I'm quite pessimistic by nature. And my personal perspective was this, I predicted this would last until September. So whatever we did in response to the pandemic can be a short-term fix. As you say, we were very quick out of the gates. Within 6 weeks, all of our exams were live, but every single exam product we had, everywhere in the world. And as a result, we have not cancelled a single exam anywhere in the world on any of our products. And that's been a phenomenal achievement. I mean, those first 6 weeks were incredibly difficult. As you say, we were like press officers. Every week we would say, this is what we know. Next week we might know this stuff and we'll tell you that. When we know that, we'll tell you the next thing. So we learned a lot about communication. I think what I reflect on most, our role as educators, leaders, whatever that might be, is that real sense of interconnectedness that I've never had before. Understanding the impact of our role on the, everyone's employment, on the tuition providers, the employers, the students. And I think what we actually did as an accounting industry, as a learning industry, was to give people hope and inspiration that there is something that carries on. For all of this disruption, all of the chaos, you can still study and you can still take your exams. I think it's a testament to our students, the resilience of our students, that they responded really, really positively. Some of the implementation was tricky and rocky at the start. It's improved significantly over the last year, but they were with us every step of the year. And we've not really seen disruption in terms of through the data, what I see through the numbers of students taking exams. They're continuing to drive their professional qualification, still progressing through, and that is remarkable given everything that's happened. So a huge credit to my team, huge credit to the students, and huge credit to everyone on this call, I'm sure, who've always supported us in that ecosystem, supporting the students and supporting everyone in this ecosystem. We also, we did focus on the needs of members. We talked about cash flow. We released a whole bunch of different documents about scenario planning, changing business models, horizon scanning to support our members. And I think I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think the role of government has never been so evident in our lives as it has been in the last year. We put a huge amount of effort into working with government, working with advocacy to really sort of influence the way that the budget was constructed, the way that the government responded to the pandemic. And we saw a lot of our recommendations come into a fore as response. So I think it was threefold: supporting the students, supporting members, advising government. And I think, as I say, our role on reflection was really to be, we gave a sense of morale, right? We gave a sense of stability, we gave an idea that it was continuation, that you could carry on. And I hope, and I thank everyone for their role in supporting the students through this very difficult period.
Yeah, Stephen, actually, I think that concept of teamwork, I mentioned earlier this phrase I've heard time and time again, we'll get through this together, and we have, I think. And, I've never seen, we have collaborated with what would otherwise have been competitors. I've seen, the awarding bodies working very closely together. I never thought I would see Ofsted as almost part of my own team and the ESFA, but, they've relied on us to give them the rapid news from the ground. Goes back to that point about being press officers and constantly needing to be pushing information to the right place. And often, and I've learned a real lesson in being willing to push out information even when you're not sure if it's 100% correct, even if it probably will change next week. I don't know if anyone's come across the mnemonic VUCA. in this last 15 months, which, you know, were VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and we all operate in a very VUCA environment, and not just because of the pandemic. You know, there's mention of Brexit. You know, we obviously know green industries are going to be huge in the future, digital technologies, things change so quickly. You've got to be willing to make decisions based on, you know, unclear, uncertain, incomplete information sometimes. I might pick up, actually, there's an interesting question causing a bit of debate in the chat box around university education and the value of university education in accountancy. Because I must admit, one of the big trends I've seen in recent years is a shift in a lot of our clients towards predominantly school leaver programs. You know, use of the AAT, say, as a stepping stone into the level 7 qualifications. A lot of employers building what I can only describe as graduate premium skepticism in terms of, actually, is it worth paying a graduate more than a school leaver, particularly because the exemptions that relevant graduates get actually play havoc with apprenticeship funding, and often the students don't have some of the core knowledge that the exemptions would perhaps imply. I'm quite interested from our panel in their views on university education. I mean, in my day, you kind of had to have a degree for, you know, to become a professional accountant. It's almost becoming a drawback now.
Shall I have just a go to get us started, Gary? I think from our perspective, we've seen quite a number of universities over the last maybe 5 years start to embed part of the AAT qualification within their degree. And why are they doing that? Well, they're doing that to deliver more of the skills that are being required for either a graduate or a school leaver when they come out and go into the workplace. So for me, however they do it, the university side of all of this has got to be more relevant to the workplace. Don't ask me how, other than embedding the AAT qualification, of course, but it's, you know, that to me, that's the challenge that the university sector, university accountancy sector faces going forwards, because we're hearing increasingly from employers, from the big firms all the way down into small organizations. Now we're going to go down the apprenticeship route because they're much more malleable. We can get proper skills into them earlier, and you know, I think that's the challenge. What's their role going forward? Just be relevant.
You mentioned apprenticeships, Andrew, and obviously graduates now can do apprenticeships at the sort of level 7 qualifications, but you know, we see more and more coming through the kind of level 2, 3, 4 as school leavers. You know, we did an analysis actually of our one of our most recent, and it was like the ICAEW intake as an example, but I think it would be mirrored across the other sort of CIMA ACCA, and compared to the previous year, the proportion of students entering into our ICAEW cohort, the proportion who were AAT completers rather than graduates had doubled in a year. So actually, Shaun, I don't know if you might have a view on university education in the accountancy world.
It is a good question you pose about sort of routes into profession and universities being one of the routes. I think you've got to take a step back and remember that England and Wales, but in the UK in general, has always been, it's not been about relevant graduates going into the profession. That's not been the majority. So it's not just accounting graduates. You talk about the wider spec. I mean, in practice, if you're going to work on audits in Shell and BP, probably a chemistry degree is going to do you as much good as an accounting degree, because you've got to understand the business. And I think that's what's been unique about our training environment. It's the wide plethora of degrees. But this rush for getting credits is probably not the best use of everybody's time just to pick up credits, because, as you mentioned before, it's about skills. It's not about just ticking the box and picking up a credit. That's definitely not a way forward. But I think, as Andrew said, the more we can work with universities and actually share our knowledge, our expertise, our exams, and we've got a few strategic degrees that have done that using our exams. But we've got to be careful as well for the universities. Some of these accounting degrees may be more history of accounting or the politics of accounting. They have their place in academia, but maybe not in professional accounting. There is a role for them. And if you had universities represented here, they'd be on us saying, you're forcing us to do this with our syllabus, you're forcing us to do that. That's always the argument we get. So I think having a variety of routes is definitely the way forward. Some people go through school leaver, apprenticeships, relevant degrees, and I think that's what's great about the accountancy profession in the UK, is that we have got this rich mix of different skill sets. But I think as a profession, we've got to push forward the skills aspect. And to help you with the soft skills point, it's not soft skills, it's professional skills, isn't it?
We call them impact skills.
Yes.
But Shaun, yeah, some great point, and I can see there's been some chatter in the chat box around that diversity point you make, and I can see Gemma and Francis and Zoe all making a similar point that diversity is so important, and obviously not everybody has the opportunity to go to university, and I'm sure none of us want to, you know, cut off potential talent from our entry pipelines. I do worry a bit that the shift, you know, we are, I think, going to see a much higher degree of remote working and hybrid working, and I fear that there may be a bit of a backward step there in terms of the access to the profession. You can imagine if you're working at home, not everyone has huge amounts of space, not everyone has a good place to work. So I think employers just need to be quite mindful whether they've got young adults, particularly trainees who are perhaps working in hybrid roles, you know, does that actually potentially disadvantage them? But I want to now sort of think forward. So we've had a bit of a think about how the last 15 months has treated us, but I now want to sort of think what changes in the industry that we've seen do we think will be permanent? You know, what other changes we can expect to see in the next couple of years? And, you know, from the awarding bodies, how do they see things playing out for themselves? And I wonder if Claire might contribute on this one.
Yep, sure. So I think we're probably all in agreement that this idea of hybrid working, as you said, is here to stay. What that looks like over the next 6 months, we will see. But that will have an impact then on that leadership and management point that I spoke about. So I think there's a role for us as professional bodies to really support our members, but I think also through the qualification point, those professional skills much earlier on, developing those. The bit that I wanted to pull out, and I think it was Peter Ellington that just made the point around accountancy education needing to change to position accountants around social and economic shift. Absolutely. So ESG, I think, is front of mind for people, particularly with COP26 this year. And I think there's such an important role that accountants can have in stepping up into this space. You know, we are in that very privileged position of really understanding ethics, understanding business, and we just need to then really support businesses, think about more sustainable recovery. We have got in our programs already environmental and the sort of ESG topics covered. I think it's really how do we bring that into the mindset of all businesses, whatever shape and size. And clearly people are still very focused on survival, particularly we know furlough is starting to go in that tailing off period now, and there's some really difficult decisions that businesses are going to need to make, but we do know there's lots coming down the line around regulations, whatever size business, and people are really going to have to think about how we grapple with climate change and how we report it and how we really make decisions around our supply chain and the social aspect. So there's a huge role for the accounting bodies to play in supporting the professional education, but also that lifelong learning. And we've already got certificates, as I said, it's already embedded into the qualification, but I think it is about that skills piece. And I think if we take one thing away from this discussion, it is how do we work together, you know, whether it's universities and employers and the professional bodies, whether it's employers and the professional bodies and the student, how do we all work together with much more of a sense of community that we've developed over these last 15 months to really grapple with that idea of skills. So it's not seen as, you know, I'm over there doing my qualification, over here is my practical experience requirements, and they're not really thought about how they embed into working practices. And I think there's a real onus on us as professional bodies to put those partnership opportunities out there. Thanks, Gareth.
Claire, fantastic. I think you make a really interesting point around, you know, the roles accountants are probably going to be involved in: sustainability, you know, I guess EDI in the workplace, you know, ethical sourcing within their organizations, you know, almost beyond what you might consider the conventional role of an accountant. I've always found it amazing how many of my former students qualify as accountants and then they go on to roles where they'll tell me, oh, I'm head of finance. and HR and facilities and IT and legal. And I think accountants are very good at taking on a variety of different tasks. You know, I think by the nature of our training, we're quite good at turning our hands to multiple different areas and bringing the same level of, you know, diligence and rigor and everything that obviously we're, you know, is embedded in us as professionals. I think that piece around, you know, the ongoing skills development, I know it's, you know, something at First Intuition, we're developing programs in leadership and management, in data analytics, to kind of take that lifelong learning beyond the day they get their qualification and get their letters after their name.
Gary, just before you move on, I just want to say that, yeah, there's probably a role then for everybody to talk about accountancy differently, I think. So, you know, how can we really reposition it as a profession? It's got to be in that, how do we support the next generation understand it? You know, and careers fairs, go out, talk at schools, talk it up, you know, talk about it's a tech and people focused profession.
The number of times, I mean, I go to school careers fairs and engage with, you know, young adults making those career decisions, and the number of times I get asked, what's an accountant? And you almost think, where do I start? You know, that word encompasses so many job roles, so many sectors, so many levels in organizations, which is actually, for me, the beauty of, you know, qualifying as an accountant, is it creates so many different career pathways in itself. I wonder whether I might now ask Steve to talk about the kind of coming months, next couple of years, in your view.
So very much. I mean, I echo the things that Claire says. You know, I think, put very simply, you know, the history of accounting perhaps is that there have been crises, and then we invented costing, and then there's a crisis and we invented controls. We're now going through another series of crises, and I think it's a little bit early to say what our response is going to be. But I think we're going to have a challenge of scarcity, whether that's supply chains that we've seen over the last year, whether that's to do with ESG, environmental constraints. I think we have challenges of abundance too. You know, the digital products can scale enormously. And how do we cope with that abundance? So we've got scarcity and abundance and everything in between. I think, echoing Claire's point, the constant is change, and it's the rapidness of change and the extent of change. And those high order skills and, you know, the strengths that qualified accountants bring is that ability to deal with change, to adapt, you know, so we can give them toolkits during these crises. They've already got the high-end, high-order cognitive skills to solve the problems that businesses are facing. And I think our emphasis has to be on that resilience, that adaptability, that problem solving. So we give them the technical skills, but we also give them the skills to adapt and change and meet the needs of business.
Yeah, really interesting point, Steve. I was involved, I'm an ICAEW member myself, and I was sitting on a skills task force in 2019 looking at the kind of skills that, you know, modern accountancy trainees and qualified professionals need. And we were doing lots of chats with employers and lots of forums and focus groups, you know, what are the core skills an accountant needs? And nobody ever said accountancy, ever. You know, that's almost a given. That's like a hygiene factor. Yes, you need the technical skills, but the important stuff is, it's all this, you know, great stuff that comes through from, you know, the competency frameworks that all of the awarding bodies use, but also then the apprenticeships. Shaun, can I call on you for your thoughts about the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think we have go through the massive change. Whether it's massive change or catching up with technology, it's always up for debate. But I think one thing that does worry me in the rhetoric over the past few months has been this talk of hybrid working, because there's been no concept about the individual and the sacrifices that individuals made over the last 15 months as well. That hybrid working, or where your best work, depends a lot on your personality and also the business needs. So rather than have this blanket go in for 2 days a week from 1st of August or whatever, I think we all need to think about the needs of the business, think about the needs of the individual. And I think somebody mentioned the chat box, which is crucial for me, is that all these people who've started new jobs, new careers, new responsibilities, who've had no contact with the teams, surely they should be prioritised so much more than somebody like me who can pick up the phone and knows who to speak to somebody. And I think we've just got to be careful we don't rush back into, well, there's the rule, let's do it. So I think we've just got to be careful about that. And also this, going back to work from the office, I mean, in all my 30 years of being in work, I've never worked from an office. If you're not actually doing like thinking. You should be out speaking to clients, students, customers. You should be out there doing it rather than actually just sitting in an office anyway. So the concept of an office for me never hasn't existed since 1990. This is not new. You should be out there doing it, walking the walk, talking the talk, or whatever. So I do find this back to the office talk slightly bizarre and draconian a little bit of a backward step that we should all embrace and push forward. We weren't doing that anyway. So I think that's one of the things we need to make sure we don't trip up on. I think going forward, we've really got to jump on where we got with technology and embrace that and push it forward, whether it be exams, how we actually do the work, working in clouds rather than putting bits of paper about the place and so on. It's been a fantastic way doing it. So we're ready for the next big thing. And then we all know the next big thing in the accountancy profession is going to be the BEIS recommendations and how that impacts the huge changes potentially that should make. We've got to be ready for that, on that curve, if not ahead of it. So we embrace the enhancements, the recommendations to enhance audit and what it means and regain public trust in that. So we actually absorb, rather than have this elongated 2 or 3 years, we've all got to embrace that. And we're there now. We're demonstrating we can do that. So things like BEIS, the ESG, the sustainability, and I think most importantly now, especially with the scarce resources of human capital, is embrace diversity once and for all and just do it. Stop talking about it and actually make sure that our profession is open to all. And if not, we can go and educate people to make sure they know about our profession.
I mean, Shaun, you mentioned BEIS. I mean, I joined ICAEW Council this month, actually, and needless to say, BEIS is a huge topic of conversation. But equally, I do think we need to remember that not all accountants work in practice. Not all accountants who work in practice work in audit. And actually, not all practices do audit these days. You know, I'm seeing an awful lot, particularly the smaller, end of the practice market. A lot of these, almost challenger practices that are doing a lot of the digital services, they're not interested in audit.
No, I agree with that, but I think if you look at some of the recommendations, it's far wider than audit. It's about directors' responsibilities and auditors' responsibilities of accountants. This is a game changer for the industry, so we've all got to be ready for that and embrace it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think you make a really interesting point about the whole back to the office area. We've been growing during the pandemic. Been very fortunate that it hasn't had this sort of effect on our sector or our business that I know it has on hospitality and travel and retail, for instance. And we've been recruiting constantly. I must have 30 colleagues who I've never met. I don't know how tall they are. I've only ever seen them as a box on my laptop. And I've heard a number of employers, that thing around the junior staff being in because they will probably value the social environment, value the mentoring. I heard a client describe their approach as filling from the bottom. If they are going to be limited in capacity in the workplace, they'll bring in the youngsters first. But you make a point, why would somebody like you necessarily need to be in the office? But what about that mentoring and that, visibility of the values and the culture of the senior staff? I was talking to one of my relatively recently qualified students recently. She's 2 years qualified. She loves going into the office every day, and she says she's often the most senior person in the office. So by default, she's almost become the managing partner, just because all the partners would rather be at home because it's easier for their childcare, or it's they've got plenty of space to work at home. And I think we need to be careful we don't just abandon our younger colleagues to be in the office together, partying while we're all at home with our dogs and picking up our kids and loving our hybrid lives. I don't know whether, Andrew, if you want to finish off this session, this phase of the session with your comments on the future.
I don't think I've much new to add. I'd agree with everything that everybody's said. To me, it's all about skills, isn't it? It's all about ensuring that we've got the right skills in our qualifications and we've got the right skills in our membership, in our more established members. What's an accountant? Somebody raised a moment or two ago. I digitally met with one of our major practices who said they struggle to recruit at the moment because the pool that they're recruiting from can't answer the question, what's an accountant? So come on, as a profession, I think we stand together on that one. And we're so well placed, given what we've been through and what has now accelerated in terms of the change, to stand up and be counted, whether it be ESG, as Claire makes the point, it got to fit somewhere. We may as well make that front and central of what we do, all the way through data analytics, changing responsibilities, changing roles. Feels to me like the time is kind of now.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm loving the start of the how high you are debate in the chat box. Absolutely.
5'9".
Fantastic. Well, I have actually met you physically, Andrew, so I do know how tall you are. But yeah, it's and in fact, does anyone else have this weird thing where they can't remember if they've met somebody physically now? You know, there are so many people that I have a really great close relationship with now. I can't honestly remember if I've only ever seen them on Zoom or if I've physically met them at some point. It's the weirdest thing. Fantastic. Okay, so thank you so much, Andrew, Shaun, Claire, and Steve, for your comments so far. Please feel free to continue chipping in through the chat box as we move through the sort of last 20 minutes of the session. But I do now want to sort of turn to, so we've sort of heard almost the opinion from the inside looking out. I thought it might be interesting to also get some opinions from the outside looking in, as it were, from a few of the industry observers that I know. And similarly, we'll sort of think initially about their view on what's happened since that first lockdown, and then we'll consider their views on where we're going in the future. And I thought, somebody who always has an opinion, I thought I might call on Graham first. Graham Hambly, do you want to introduce yourself and just give us a couple of minutes thinking about what you've seen over this last 15 months?
Hi everyone, so I'm Graham Hambly, I'm the editor of PQ magazine. Yeah, it's been a really interesting 15 months. I think it's been really tough for part qualified accountants. They don't live in big mansions like all their partners and have lots of room. They're often sharing accommodation. Me here, I've got 5 people living in my house and we fight. So I've moved into the front room today to do this. Someone's in the dining room, and 2 people are upstairs and one's sitting on a bed. And they're all working, everyone's working. And to try and do that, trying to work and study, it becomes very, very problematic. And PQs are not enjoying working from home. Studies that Hayes have done have shown if given the choice of working from home was there, just 12% of part qualifieds said they would take that opportunity. And we're talking about, digitally really clever people who don't want to be working from home just on their computers. And if you even talk about blended working, just 32% said they'd like that. People need to be back in the office, particularly they've not met any of their colleagues, their partners. And if you're going into a profession like Andrew said, and they don't even know what accountancy is, because they might be a chemist or there might be something else as a graduate, then they're going in blind. And I think it's a real worry, because I think culture and ethics are sort of things you learn from when you go into work. It's how you build your environment, your professional life. So I think it's a problem for part qualifieds working from home. I really do, and I think agile working is fantastic, and I think it's something. I noticed one of the reports from one of the Big Four said that they've been doing agile working since 2015. I went, oh wow, 6 whole years. That's how long it's been, But and so it seems to be such a new concept for everyone. The idea, most bosses wouldn't let you work from home. I want to do it as a journalist, but they wouldn't let me do it all those years ago. And now I am. I've given up the office and I'm home here permanently. Coming to the exams, I know, Gareth, you congratulated all the professional bodies. I probably wouldn't congratulate them quite and give them such an easy time. Some have performed better than others, and it's been very problematic. And yes, people have been able to progress their careers, but students are quite vulnerable, because they're part qualified also within their firms, it means that they're quite vulnerable with their position. So not being able to take exams or show how good they are is a problem. Remote invigilation is fantastic. It's here to stay. I think eventually we'll have exams on demand, even by, sort of the ACCA. I think that's coming. That progress is something we won't be able to stop. I know, Martin, I know you're saying no. I don't particularly think it's a good idea either. I don't think it works for students and progress. You know, they have issues with that. Understanding when they're ready for an exam, lots of students don't know that. But you can imagine now they're all in isolation, you know, that becomes even more problematic. So the rise of remote invigilation is great. And the AAT pilot has gone fantastically well, I understand, Andrew. And you know, you're going to be able to at least have that fallback now and not rely on those sort of things. I'm just trying to think what else I was going to say. I think learning via Zoom and online is fantastic, but I still think a blended approach always works best for me, where students can actually come together at some point, you know, and get relationships with their fellow students. I know quite a few ICAEW trainees who are currently just starting out and going to, you know, FI or Kaplan or BBP, or, you know, and they really do benefit from getting together and socialising with their fellow sufferers on their journey to qualification. So that's my initial thoughts, and I'll leave it to the rest of the panel to either disagree or agree. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Graham. And, you know, again, you make a point there around, you know, that importance of building culture physically. I was chatting to a law partner a week or two ago, and they were saying the bit that's really missing now in their organisation, really bizarrely, is the drive to the client and back, where the partner and the junior would be sitting in the car together talking, and, you know, that they said that's actually a really important part of that cultural, you know, values and communicating how they actually act, and they've really missed that. Well, we've already had a couple of shouts out actually for Chris from Generation CFO. So I wonder if I might call on you now, Chris, to give your thoughts about this last 15 months.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for the mentions. It's always good to get that feedback. Being in the virtual world, as you say, you don't get that in person anymore. But my name's Chris Argent, so I'm the founder of Generation CFO, and it's a community of industry CFOs and finance people. So we're very much focused on industry. We're also focused on the technology shift, so trying to bring the traditional world of accounting and finance together with capability like automation, analytics, and agile ways of working. And a lot of what I'm going to say now is based on, you know, working with that community, our quarterly research that we do with them, and the conversations we have with the CFOs from an advisory point of view. Looking back, I think, first of all, there was a pretty easy shift actually to home working generally. I don't think anyone had a huge amount of problem working from home. You know, as you say, some people were already working from home a day a week, maybe more. And I think that shift was quite good. But what that sort of told me as an evangelist of technology, and I think a few people have said it so far, that, you know, the change was an option. It's always been an option, but it was just an option not taken by people. So whether it was using Zoom, which we've been using for years, long before the pandemic, whether it's using analytical tools and self-service or apps, or using a web browser instead of logging into something in an office, you know, that's always been there. The technology is there. So I think it highlighted to people quite early on that, you know, we can do a lot more, and maybe it's our mindset that needs to change around this stuff. From an industry point of view, again, you know, we saw teams stepping up, and absolute credit to everybody who did. Huge amount of demand from the business, from a planning point of view, from a cash point of view. And I think it's fair to say that the finance team saved a lot of companies, you know, over that 15 months and probably still. But was it sustainable? Was the way that they were working sustainable? And I think a lot of people during this time, they paused capital projects, they paused finance transformation projects, but the actual priority for it went up. So there was this sort of acknowledgement that, yes, we need to sort of make sure our companies are surviving, but we also acknowledge now that we need to make this change. And we saw, you know, more output from people, from the finance team, but I think it was very much based on longer hours rather than more of a technical way of working, an advanced way of working. So it highlighted this issue around, you know, our own agility, our own ability to respond to change within accounting and finance, and the use of technology. And I think Steve from CIMA said it. The companies that were already on this journey were able to respond a lot quicker. And, you know, you've got a live example from CIMA. They were already computerized. They were able to shift. You know, we had a conversation with the shared services of the NHS, one of the largest shared services in the world. And they said, look, without process automation, there's no way they could have operated last year. You know, and just think what that means. Like, they could not have paid bills. They might have interrupted stock supply to hospitals. You know, this is the importance of what we're doing, and the need to shift has, you know, become very real in a lot of cases. So, you know, we see a massive effort being put in by finance teams and CFOs. Credit to everybody, but I think the last 15 months has shown us that we do need to change in the future, and that change is very much on the people side rather than the technology side.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I think you know, from our perspective at First Intuition, you know, we work with lots and lots of accountancy firms. We work with lots and lots of finance teams in different organisations. Work with the NHS, which I think always gives us a really quite unique insight into the broad spectrum of what's going on in different corners of the sector. And somebody else I think who has a similar perspective probably is Louise. Actually, I wonder if, Louise, you might introduce yourself, because you similarly work with lots of accountancies and accountants, and I know you've done a survey quite recently, haven't you, Louise?
Yes, hi. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Louise Wilson at Moneypenny, and I head up our finance sector here. So yes, I'm going to drop into the chat the actual survey. So we commissioned in December, right in the middle of our pandemic, 250 senior people from accountancy firms on what their future focus was for the next 12 months. So I'm going to share that. It is a 29-page report, but there are some key takeaways in there that you can pull, you know, really find quite beneficial. So what we saw, how the pandemic affected our accountancy clients and our prospects that we were talking to. We've talked about communication, and what happened was a lot of firms just, when the pandemic hit, we all scurried off working from home, and then they put on their website, our phone lines are not available, please email. And although there was some firms, these were not our clients, by the way, there were some firms that simply diverted their main switchboard number to one person's mobile working on the kitchen table. So in their words, it was a single point of failure. So we even had one client or prospect who's now a client. They had 6 offices with 6 receptionists, and the practice manager every Friday was driving from house to house to collect that work mobile because they were on a rota, as you know, all that time and energy. So we saw lots of pain points for our prospects, and by the flick of a button and a divert, they then put all their calls over to Moneypenny. So that pain was taken away. But we talked about staff, junior staff, part qualified and qualified. It's that question, who answers the calls into a firm? Who picks up those phone calls? And each firm has a different answer. Sometimes you've got receptionists, sometimes you get the trainees to answer, qualified accountants going into hunt groups. Nobody likes to answer the phone. So I think what happened in the pandemic, the client journey suffered, and clients were very frustrated because working with someone like Moneypenny, so it accelerated those firms. They were like, okay, we've been thinking about someone like Moneypenny, today we need it. So we had a huge spike last year of firms wanting to engage with us, where we answer the calls, we transfer calls to wherever anyone is working, and we integrate with teams. So it was a really seamless delivery for those clients that reached out to us. But the next 12 months, we see, because communication has changed, accountancy.
I'll tell you what, Louise, we'll come to the sort of coming months in just a second. You know, thanks for your thoughts on, and I think, you know, I have 2 teenage daughters, and I see that thing with young adults, the unwillingness to want to speak to somebody on a phone. the unwillingness to read stuff. They seem to communicate through 6-second videos, this TikTok app. I mean, it's just you know, I think we all need to be very conscious, particularly with our new intakes, of, you know, some of the developmental differences we're going to see in areas like communication. I've actually also got, and Andrew, you picked up on, you know, the number of people, no, sorry, Graham, you picked up on the number of people you've got working in your home. I have Martin Taylor actually working downstairs from me, because he came for the first time we've seen each other for many, many months last night, having a bit of a catch-up chat. So actually, Martin, from your perspective, you know, as one of the leads at First Intuition, what have you seen over this last 15 months? How would you, you know, quantify it?
I love the way you describe a catch-up chat being a couple of bottles of wine, but that's yeah. I understood. There's 2 points really. I'm, as Gareth said, I work at First Intuition. I'm chairman at First Intuition Limited, and there's 2 reflections, like big reflections, I guess, I've got in the last 12 months. And the first one is really about our role as in an education sector. So I know we're talking about accountancy education here, but it's been very clear to me that, you know, education is a bit of a conveyor belt, you know, from sort of GCSEs through to A levels, through to either going to work or going to do a degree, and through a degree to then into work and early careers. You've got, you know, year 1 trainees, 2 trainees, 3 trainees, and it's been a model that's been around for sort of decades. And the last 12 months have just smashed that model up. And so I think the 2020 intake of people who went to work, actually, they'd had the vast majority of their A-level and degree programs as normal. And I think that actually, I know it's not looking too far forward, but the 2021 intakes, you know, they've probably had, you know, A-level students, you know, coming into work have only had probably 3 or 4 months of their A-levels in school. You know, if you're doing a degree, you've had your last, you know, 15 months or so, 18 months probably, not in a university setting, learning from people. You've got a year 1 trainees who are going to be buddies for, you know, sort of people coming into the office space in September who've never actually worked in that office. So these are huge structural issues to our, you know, education sector. You know, and then put on top of that for those youngsters the idea that if I fail my driving test, I might have to wait a year to get a retake because there's no other opportunities. This whole learning impact on these individuals from sort of 16 to 23 is massive. And I guess I love the fact that we've all talked about all these fantastic other things, but to me, this, you know, education sector should be focused on getting the basics right. And by getting the basics right, it means that, you know, exams go ahead without a hitch. You know, when someone's put in 100 hours into studying, there's no hitch in that exam. But for us as an education provider, that when we say there's a 9:30 start, the 9:30 start happens, and, you know, attendance is recorded and it goes ahead. You know, making sure that we support those individuals as best as we possibly can. So I guess that's one of my things, is not to lose sight of still working on the basics. We are not out of this, and still to keep working on the basics of education. The second bit, and I guess this is linked to that, is I have a massive concern now about how the next generation of, you know, people currently doing GCSEs or degrees are going to view online education. Because, you know, like Gareth, I've got a daughter at first year uni, I've got a son who's just done his GCSEs, so I've watched what, I guess, and I've seen what we do as at First Intuition on online education, and it is not consistent, shall we say. You know, when I can see, you know, the work that's, well, the university that my daughter's at doing a physics degree, and they've only got 200 spaces on their Zoom, and there's 240 people on the course. You get to a lecture, and if you're not there half an hour early, you know, you're watching a recording sort of thing. You know, this is, you know, basic sort of access to education that, you know, I think the term online education is not consistently used across our different sectors right now. And I think that's a challenge when we talk about how people are going to blended learning in the future. Are we potentially turning people off good quality online education by what's been happening over the last year? So those are my 2 points, I guess. Stick to the basics, and we've got to be really robust about, you know, selling the benefits of online education. I think it's had a bad run of it in the last year.
Thanks, Martin. I think you make a really important point around the new intakes we're all going to see later this year, 2022, I suspect even 2023, you know, the fractured nature of their end of their educational journey, you know, how little of their time they will have been in school, the fact they actually, you know, even if they've done an accounting A level, they won't have actually sat an accounting A level. You know, it's all on assessed grades now. So, you know, we're going to have to be very mindful of the, you know, the experiences that they have or haven't had sitting exams, have or haven't had being with their classmates, being with, you know, their teachers, just socializing, you know, some really big differences. And even actually those younger, you know, or members of our workforce who are already in. I was talking to a partner, and this was late last year, but you know, they'd had some of their trainees on furlough, some hadn't, and those who hadn't been on furlough therefore had twice as much work to do. So they were saying, well, second years are effectively either first years because they've been on furlough for months, or their third years because they've been doing twice as much work. And therefore they've almost got a gap of not anyone who's really a second year. So some really interesting dynamics, I think, coming. And now we're into the last 5 minutes. So to finish off, we're going to have to keep it nice and tight to about a minute per speaker to think about the future. Bit of a challenge to the audience, thinking forward to the next few months, next couple of years. 4 words, the future in 4 words. Where do you think the future is going to be in 4 words from the audience, please? There's your challenge. But for a minute each from our various speakers, if I can perhaps call on Chris again, actually, what's your thoughts on the future?
So the future, I would say, you know, acknowledge that we are in this VUCA world. We always have been, right? We've always adapted to change, and we need to make, you know, further change. But I think the very immediate future is around, you know, organizing return to work, understanding what people want, and actually being there to soft land people, because if there are any concerns around mental health, you're going to have to manage that as well. You know, you're going to get presenteeism versus absenteeism, which, you know, is someone being in the office but actually not working very well, or someone, you know, having to adapt back to being in the office. And I think there will be a return to the office. You know, who knows how much, but there will be a return. So it does definitely need to be managed. And we're seeing that as, you know, top of the agenda, return to work and mental health from a lot of CFOs. But partnering that up also with this agility question, it's like, how do we make sure that we learn from the last 15 months and we are able to, you know, respond to the business, bring in these new skills and talent. And consequently, I think there is a sort of focus on learning pathways. So it's like, you know, we talked about it. Is it AAT versus degree? Is it, you know, technical skills, digital skills? You know, what do we go for there? You know, do we go after CPD rather than, you know, being qualified? There's a lot of challenge around, you know, the skills that we need to be learning. So
brilliant. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to cut you short there and turn over to Louise for 60 seconds.
Oh, I'll take 30 seconds. It's okay. I think we've talked about it, but communications have changed. And I just think as businesses, we need to make sure that we're giving a choice, not just to our in-house teams on how they communicate, but also the clients, the customers, giving them the choice. Gone are the days, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 is just a phone. That's just not, it's just not going to cut it anymore. So yeah, communication's changing.
Fantastic, thanks, Louise. And you know, certainly I've grown more and more used to just the sheer range of platforms and communication. I think we need an app to manage our communication apps, because I struggle to remember where any given message may be and to, you know, which channel or which platform. Graham, 60 seconds.
Okay, 60 seconds, here goes. So I think the accountants who hide behind the numbers and the data, days are numbered, and I think we shouldn't forget that the robots are coming. My big hope as well for the future is that people will stop talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and instead talk about digital currency, and that's what's going to be happening, I think. And for me, that would be really good. Exam-wise, students just have been so resilient and done so well to keep going. So just keep going, guys. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you very much. And, you know, interesting point there around crypto. And I think actually an understanding of a broad plethora of digital technologies like, you know, cryptocurrencies, cybersecurity, AI, data is going to become part and parcel of the finance professionals toolkit now. And final minute, Martin, you want to tail us off now?
4 words you said, didn't they? So I'm just going to go with flexibility, But linked to that, empathy. So trying to be more flexible means people get things wrong. So I think everyone's going to have to be much more empathetic with each other, with organisations, as customers, as suppliers, and for us specifically, I guess at FI, bridging programs. I can see the need for lots of bridging programs to make the leap from A levels or degrees, whether that be in skills or knowledge. So yeah, there you go.
Fantastic, thank you, Martin. And seeing a nice comment from Ian there. Hi, Ian. Play lots more golf. It won't be golf for me, but I take the point. So bang on 10 o'clock there. I want to say a massive thank you to all of our panelists today. So Andrew, Claire, Shaun, Steve, fantastic input from our UN of awarding bodies, and then Graham, Louise, Chris and Martin. Thanks for your contribution as well. Thank you everyone for joining us and for contributing loads of great stuff in the chat box. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will hopefully see a lot of you soon. Thank you very much. Have a good day.